Hello everyone, and welcome to Autocrat, episode 19.
Theseus. This is part 2 of our trilogy on the Minotaur, so how did you feel about last episode?
I felt positive.
Yeah, despite all the horrifying themes?
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah.
Positive.
Positively horrified. Haha. So anyway, this is part 2 of our trilogy, to sidestep that bad pun. This is part 2 of our trilogy. Part 3 will be wrapping up some loose ends with, for example, Daedalus, the creator of the labyrinth. And after that, I believe you're leading us into the story of Heracles.
I am. It's going to be a very long ride. Believe me, a very long one.
So long. So many tasks. However, before we continue the story in any more detail, I would like to come back to a joke we made at the end of last episode during the outro, which was that Minos might be a tortoise due to how long-lived he appears to be in one version of events.
He is a tortoise, it's confirmed.
Well, in a way it is, because I would like to demonstrate here, as an informal thesis, that it is in fact possible. The oldest living terrestrial animal is a Seychelles giant tortoise called Johnathan. The creature is estimated to have been born in about 1832, so was 191 years old in 2023 when the Guinness Book of Records discussed it. There's an article from the Smithsonian discussing it in December 2023, and as far as I can tell, Johnathan is still alive. So I think that means it's pretty much canon Minos is a tortoise.
Exactly.
Maybe even a Seychelles giant tortoise. Anyway, on to the actual episode. There's going to be a fair few different versions, mostly because Plutarch in his Life of Theseus loved noting down every single possibility for the version of events. However, I've done my best to either narrow it down to one version or state what the different possibilities are, and then we can make our minds up. We're going to be relying, in terms of sources, on Diodorus Siculus, our favourite Egypt fanboy, Plutarch's Life of Theseus, and a little bit of the Parian stele for a sense of chronology. Diodorus says that Theseus was born to Poseidon and Aethra, so we've got a different god this time, consorting with mortals. However, a man called Aegeus, who we discussed last episode as king of Athens, suspected that Theseus was his child, and he therefore left some sandals and sword under a rock. He told Aethra that when her child was strong enough to lift the rock, he should take the gifts and come and find him.
That was nice.
Yeah. Plutarch finds some comparisons between Romulus and Theseus during the course of his narrative, as both of them are supposed to be the children of deities with parents or father figures we aren't quite sure as to their identity. Theseus' maternal grandfather was called Pythius, who was the son of Pelops, who I believe we've mentioned 1 or 2 times in connection to various heroes being married off to his daughters. Pelops was a king and installed his sons in positions of power, and one of these was Pythius, who became governor of a city called Troezen, spelled Troezen.
Very nice.
So, do you want to tell us a bit more about Aegeus?
Of course, so we now transition to King Aegeus of Athens, who descended from someone called Erechtheus.
I believe he's a minor figure in Greek mythology. If I'm remembering correctly, he might be the son of Athena, but I might be getting him confused with someone else.
He really wanted children and asked the Delphic oracle about the question. However, the oracle told him not to loosen his wineskin before he went back to Athens, or else he would perish due to grieving.
Okay. The oracle loves cryptic announcements, we've now established.
However, Pythius persuaded or tricked him into sleeping with Aethra.
Okay, that seems the opposite of the protected father stereotype. Here, go with my daughter.
I'm not sure exactly why, but you know. Aegeus saw that Aethra might be with child and left the gifts behind.
Yep.
Plutarch says Aethra hid who the father of her child was, and that Pythius put out a rumor that Poseidon was the father.
Okay, so why is that?
The people of Troezen, after all, venerated Poseidon, most among the gods.
Right.
And maybe this was what Pythius was after, a grandchild who could be claimed as Poseidon's son.
I suppose that would make sense. The PR of that stunt would be quite impressive. Theseus was raised at Troezen in his grandfather's house until he travelled to find Aegeus. While travelling to Athens, he basically mimics the labours of Heracles in that he deals with monsters and just generally with problems along the way. However, we won't go into all of these deeds here, and I believe you'll take up the story next when he actually arrives in the city of Athens.
Exactly. Aegeus was married to Medea at this time, who had promised him children by hook or by crook, as she's a sorceress and the text makes a reference to this.
Okay, so she's basically going to use her magical powers to give him children.
Yep.
Now, Medea will come up, I should say, in our discussion of Jason and the Argonauts, so look out for that in future.
Nice. When Theseus showed up, she recognized him first.
Right.
Aegeus was old and paranoid at this time, which I suppose we saw with the death of Minos' son a few years back.
That does make sense, actually, because wasn't that child killed because Aegeus thought he might plot with the sons of Pallas to kick him off the throne?
Very true.
Yeah. Okay.
So she told him that Theseus was from a rival power in the city and told him to poison him during a banquet.
Okay, drastic way of dealing with your opposition.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
But mythology is nothing if not dramatic.
Yeah, well, we've learnt there's factions in Athens, at least.
Theseus wanted to give a dramatic reveal and so drew his sword given by his father to cut the meat.
That's so extra, but also reminds me of a story I think you told me about Queen Elizabeth II cutting a cake using a ceremonial sword.
Yes.
I like to imagine this is a really disproportionately large sword and a very small bit of meat.
Why not?
Yeah.
But now it meant that Aegeus knew who he was and disposed of the deadly draught.
Okay, well that's good. Otherwise this would be a very short episode.
It would
Theseus
be.
is dead. Thank you for listening, everyone. Well, the children of Pallas, who we mentioned last time, and who had at first hoped to get the kingdom after Aegeus died, were resentful, and I think these are the rival group mentioned in Athens, because they come up sort of in opposition to Aegeus. Aegeus had first adopted an unrelated man called Pandion to be his heir, and now there was this, so I assume this is the straw that broke the camel's back for the children of Pallas. They laid an ambush for Theseus, but long story short, he found out and drove them away. A fun bit of trivia is that he found this out thanks to a man from somewhere called Aegeus, and this man was called Laos. Supposedly, the inhabitants of Pallene, which I suppose is related to Pallas, Pallene, still want nothing to do with the city of Agnes, at least at the time the sources are writing. Theseus also beat the bull of Marathon, which had arrived in the region thanks to Heracles' labours. This also means that Heracles happens before Theseus, or at least to some extent, but we're dealing with Theseus first.
Yeah, we're dealing with him first. Heracles is going to be a long ride.
Yeah, and also I'm pretty sure mythology makes no sense in terms of the chronology when you try and actually create one version. Aegeus sacrificed this bull to Apollo, and Theseus then brought his attention to the Minotaur. As we mentioned last episode, every 9 years, 7 men and 7 women were to be brought to Crete to be fed to the beast.
Yep.
Minos showed up with a massive fleet as 9 years had gone by, and well, the next lot of captives was due. In among this second, or possibly third, depending who you believe, batch of captives was Theseus.
Ooh, that doesn't bode well.
We'll get to the exact specifics of how he ended up there in a little bit. Now, Aegeus took the captain to one side and made a little agreement with him. If Theseus returned alive, the ship's sails should be white. If he was dead, they should be black. These are very clear instructions that you would think it would be very hard to mess up.
Yes.
I'm
Alive, white, dead, black.
Yes, I'm sure there will be no problems with this. This is a very simple system that cannot be messed up in any way. It's foolproof.
Yes, exactly. Black is alive, white is dead.
Exactly. Oh, wait, was that the other way around? Ah, my memory these days. It's what with all the sailing charts, things just go from my head. So, with that little bit of foreshadowing out of the way, they set off for Crete. When in the palace, Ariadne, Minos' daughter from last episode, became smitten with Theseus. Diodorus says this is because Theseus was extraordinarily good looking, and I like that we get that detail.
Yeah, we do get that detail.
Perseus is blonde, Theseus is apparently very handsome. He talked to her, got her help, and killed the Minotaur. And this is where we transition over to you to explore a little bit more about what Plutarch has to say about these events.
Plutarch says that Theseus was with the third batch of prisoners, not the second.
Okay.
There is apparently an alternative account that the labyrinth was just a prison and a man called Tortoise treated them harshly.
Okay, that would make sense, Taurus being the bull element of it.
This sounds like ancient writers trying to rationalize the ancient stories to me.
Yeah, I suppose it does, that the Minotaur has just turned into a jailer who treats everyone harshly.
And to answer our previous question, the victims were actually chosen at random.
Okay.
So the people were angry that Aegeus was not putting his son up for the lot.
Okay, as would be understandable.
Yeah. Theseus was moved by this and told the people he would go without being put up for a ballot at all.
Right, I'm assuming Aegeus took him to one side and said, I really don't think you understand what the point of that previous move was.
Exactly. An alternative account says Minos chose the victims himself and picked Theseus first, maybe to make Aegeus suffer? A son for a son? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, maybe. Maybe he just wanted some revenge for his kid who got killed by Aegeus. I mean, the text doesn't say why Theseus was picked, but given that he is quite conspicuously Aegeus' son, as the people seem to know, maybe that's why.
Ariadne gave him string with which to navigate the labyrinth.
Okay.
So that's the famous Ariadne with the string,
Yep.
you know. He killed the Minotaur and sailed away from Crete with Ariadne and the other prisoners.
Right, so that's the Minotaur gone. When I read these sources, it very much felt like the Minotaur was just an anticlimactic fight. You'd think there was this huge narrative being built up around it, and then pretty much in one or two sentences, it's dead now. Very much a Perseus level of dealing with problems as soon as they crop up. As they tried to get out of the harbour, they met Tortoise, the commander of Minos' navy, and probably the same Tortoise we mentioned earlier. There was a fight, and according to someone called Demon, Tortoise was killed. Theseus had also drilled holes in the ships of the Cretan navy, so they're unable to give chase as Theseus sails away out of the harbour. One version says that Tortoise and Theseus fought each other in single combat, which Minos only agreed to because Tortoise was accused of getting a little bit too familiar and too comfortable around Pasiphae, his wife. Minos was impressed with how Theseus did in the fight and gave him the other captives as a reward. At this juncture, let's deal with Ariadne's story, first talking about Plutarch's version of events and then those of Diodorus. Ariadne might have killed herself after Theseus abandoned her in some traditions, and sometimes she marries a clergyman who's devoted to Dionysus. Sometimes Theseus leaves her because he falls in love with another woman, and sometimes they actually have children called Staphylos and Eunopion. One version says that Theseus left her on Cyprus while pregnant with their child because of a storm. He was going back to the boat to help it, and presumably coming right back to Ariadne, we promise, when the storm took him back to open sea, so he couldn't go back to her. In a scene that is a little bit heartbreaking, the Cypriots forged letters from Theseus to give to Ariadne, as if he's writing, "Oh, I'll come right back for you, I love you so much, sweetheart." So they're writing these letters and giving them to Ariadne as if he'd written them, and she died in childbirth. Theseus came back and learnt she died, ordering sacrifices to be made to her, which I find interesting because that specifically says to her as if she's a god, not on her behalf. Another version again says there were two people called Ariadne, just as we've established there are two people called Minos. One of them married Dionysus and had the two sons we mentioned earlier, and the other went with Theseus much later in time and was abandoned, later travelling to Naxos, dying there and becoming the subject of veneration by the people. So, as you can see, there's a lot of different ideas of what might have happened to Ariadne. We do have one final version of events about Ariadne from Diodorus that is intimately connected with the sails that we mentioned earlier that definitely weren't foreshadowing. On the way back from Crete, Theseus steals Ariadne away from Minos and sails away, as we've seen before, and arrives at Naxos. Dionysus then appeared on the island in question, having fallen in love with Ariadne, and takes her away. Dionysus loved her a lot and made her into a constellation called the Crown of Ariadne after she died. However, Theseus was understandably distraught that his love had been taken away from him, so he forgot his father's request. The ship accordingly sailed back into Athens with a black sail, not a white one. Aegeus saw the sail and, understandably, presumed his son was dead.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, he either climbed on top of the Acropolis and threw himself from it, or else threw himself into the sea which bore his name of Aegean afterwards.
He's back, as you just said, and
Yep.
he becomes king of Athens after Aegeus dies.
Yep.
As a king, Theseus printed money with a bull on it, either in memory of the Marathon bull or of Taurus.
Okay, so we've either got the Minotaur saga being remembered, or the fact that he killed that bull at one time before he went out to Crete.
As to when all this happened, the Parian's tale says Theseus created Athens as a state in about 995, which is about 1260 BCE.
Okay, so we're narrowing down towards contemporary history a little bit. Exciting. Now, there's an episode we have to discuss, which happens while he's king, and this is the affair of the Amazons.
Alright.
Theseus may have accompanied Heracles to the land of the Amazons and been granted a woman called Antiope because of how brave he was while there. Most say that he did it after Heracles and took Antiope himself, but the point is he's in possession or has with him an Amazon woman called Antiope. Supposedly, how he got hold of her was that the Amazons wanted to welcome him, he allowed Antiope on board, and then immediately sailed away as soon as she was on the ship. We won't go into the side quests here, but this prompted the Amazons to invade a region of Greece called Attica. Supposedly, there was a peace with Queen Hippolyta after 4 months of fighting, although some traditions say she might have died by this point, and Again, another version of accounts says Antiope might have brought the Amazons down because Theseus rejected her and married someone called Phaedra, but it seems more likely to me that if you're kidnapping someone, the people that she's part of are going to want revenge on you.
True.
Now, Antiope was the mother of someone called Hippolytus by Theseus. Theseus then married Phaedra, the daughter of Minos, and therefore the sister of Ariadne. Maybe he's projecting a little bit if he loved Ariadne so much.
Maybe.
Yeah, marries her sister instead. This marriage happened once someone called Deucalion was king of Crete because, as we'll see next time, Minos isn't in the story anymore. But now we've got an issue, because we've got Phaedra, the new wife of Theseus, and Hippolytus, his son by a previous wife. Hippolytus was dispatched back to Troezen to be raised by his grandmother's brothers, and when he came back for performance of mysteries, his stepmother Phaedra fell in love with him. She therefore asked Hippolytus to go to bed with her when she, Hippolytus, and Theseus were staying at Theseus's grandfather's house. Hippolytus said no.
I bet she didn't like that.
No, in point of fact she was enraged and lied to Theseus that Hippolytus had propositioned her, so completely swapping the story around. Theseus was, admittedly, sceptical and sent for Hippolytus to ask him about it. Phaedra, afraid of her lie being discovered once Hippolytus was in the room, hung herself to death.
That seems like an overreaction.
Yeah, it also seems like I'm not sure what the plan was. Theseus was always going to ask Hippolytus about this, or at the very least confront him about it.
True.
Meanwhile, Hippolytus was out riding, and while he was out riding, he got a message that there had been an accusation that he'd propositioned Phaedra. He was so upset when he learned of this that he was no longer actually controlling the horses who were pulling his chariots. The chariot broke, maybe it smashed against something, and Hippolytus became entangled in the reins, but the horses were still running. He was therefore dragged along the ground and died.
That's sad.
Yeah, so that's Theseus' son now dead. So, Theseus' story is also connected to one we mentioned in episode 12, which is that of Pirithous, the man who tried to kidnap Persephone for a second time.
That's nice.
Do you want to tell us a bit more about it?
Pirithous showed up at his court in Athens one day after his wife died.
Okay.
When he learned Phaedra was also dead, he convinced him to kidnap Helen, daughter of Leda by Zeus.
Right, this seems like a foolproof plan.
Helen, who we will discuss after we get through Heracles, was 10 years old at the time.
Yikes.
Once they had the girl, they drew lots for her hand, saying that whoever lost would help the other find a wife.
Okay, so Helen's going to be married off to one of these middle-aged men in this scenario. Yeah.
Theseus was to marry Helen.
Okay, so he won, quote-unquote.
Theseus is supposed to have also slept with Iphicles' daughters and did very bad thing to Helen forcefully.
Okay, yeah. From what I gather you're about to talk about next, Theseus is just not a very nice individual when it comes to women.
No, apparently not. He's been really accused of forcefully taking women, serial marriage, and abandoning Ariadne.
Okay.
And to make matter, worse, he was about 50 when he took Helen.
Okay, 40-year age gap with a 10-year-old girl.
Yeah.
Okay. Yikes.
He either took her himself or two of his henchmen did it for him.
Right.
They might have stolen her from Sparta while she was dancing in Artemis' temple. The Athenians were upset and Theseus had to run away to a city in Attica called Athena, where Aethra and some of his men protected her.
Okay, well at least the people of Athens are upset, so that's something.
Yeah.
Not everyone is turning a blind eye to the fact that the 50-year-old has just kidnapped a 10-year-old girl.
Pirithous, meanwhile, decided to marry Persephone and asked Theseus to help him get her.
Okay.
What is with those people in just getting women?
I don't know, and also why are you going for one of Zeus's daughters? This feels like the worst possible idea.
It does. Theseus wanted to talk him down from such a blasphemous act, but he had made a vow, and Pirithous was insistent.
Okay, so if even Theseus is trying to talk you down, and the only reason he can't is because he made that promise earlier he'd help you find a wife, that's not great.
And guess what? They were in prison for blasphemy.
Yeah. It seems like a bad vow, though, that the groom gets to just state who he wants and you can't in any way influence that decision.
Heracles later rescued Theseus in some versions, but in others he's still down there.
Okay, so in one version of events, he's just in Hades, that's the end of the story, we've dealt with him.
Pirithous, by contrast, definitely did not get out.
Yeah, I can see why.
Plutarch as a more rational version of the story of Perseus, where it's actually a king of the Molossian where they try to take a daughter from.
Oh, okay.
The king called himself Hades, his wife Persephone, and his dog Cerberus.
Okay, so this is just a Molossian king role-playing in Plutarch's version of events, then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Given how afraid the Greeks were of mentioning Hades by name, as we saw in previous episode, this seems unlikely.
Yeah. It seems unlikely that one of the Greek kings would full-on just take the name Hades. That seems like tempting fate.
Plutarch says Perseus was ripped to shreds by Cerberus, maybe, quote,
Yep.
while Theseus was imprisoned.
Yep.
Heracles learned of their problem while staying in the land of Molossus and asked for Theseus to be released, which the king granted.
Okay, nice. In case you were wondering, or in case you were worried, Helen's story does have a good end as such. Her brothers, Castor and Pollux, burn Epidna to the ground and rescue her, which makes sense in the context of the character of protective brothers.
Yeah.
They also took back Aethra, and she would be a slave instead in Lacedaemon, which isn't great, even if they were trying to save their sister. Theseus was later banished from Athens because a rivaling sect got hold of power. You remember that Athens was full of all those factions earlier?
Yep.
Well, it seems they've got to him. Theseus, at length, becoming desperate with all the faction trouble, sent his kids away and travelled to Skyros, where he'd inherited land from Aegeus, and I think this means private land rather than just another kingdom he can run to. Theseus travelled to Skyros and asked the ruler for his land. However, the local king Lycomedes was either envious of Theseus and how far he'd come, or else was helping Theseus's rival in Athens. So he led him to the tallest cliff on the island, pretending to bring him to his estate. What do you think happens next? Well, he throws him off the cliff, killing him.
I bet that's what happened.
Theseus was honoured in Athens with a building called the Theseum, which seems odd given that the Athenians just chased him out of the city, and given that he's frankly been a terrible person during this episode. He may have been also walking after dinner and fallen himself, according to one very anticlimactic version of the story, so he doesn't even get a hero's dramatic ending full of violence and intrigue, he just falls off a cliff after dinner. So, what did you think of Theseus?
I think he's a very particular man.
Yeah, he's an acquired taste.
Like, he's done some less good things.
Yeah.
Like, he can be a hero for defeating the Minotaur, but that's basically all he's got under his belt.
Yeah.
The rest of him is a bit like,
I suppose there's a moral there in that if you do one good deed for someone, that doesn't make you a hero. You have to back it up with your character in general as well.
Very true.
Well, next time we will not be dealing with Theseus, seeing as he's dead, but instead we'll catch up with Daedalus, who, in one account by someone called Clydemus, which I only know because of Plutarch, has been chased all the way to Sicily by King Minos. This was supposedly in strict contravention of a Greek agreement that only Jason and the Argo were allowed to sail with about 5 people or more on board, so there's heavy restrictions. And I believe that the reason that Jason is allowed to do this is because he is hunting down pirates. So, next time we'll deal with that. But for now, that's the end of our episode. Thank you very much for listening, everyone.
Have a great week.
Yeah, have a great week. You looking forward to dealing with Heracles after this? It's going to be a really fun story, I think.
It is going to take us a while.
But it's worth it. I haven't seen many accounts